Hey everyone, welcome to the Mighty Books Podcast, where we sit down and chat with mighty authors about their books, message, writing successes, struggles, and other relevant authorship topics. I'm your host, Ryan Embalmer, author of the Beasts of Men and Gods series, and let's get started on today's chat. This episode of the Mighty Books Podcast is featuring Thom Carnell. Thom Carnell is a writer whose fiction has been featured in Swank Magazine, Carpe Noctem Magazine, and in the horror anthology Bloody Carnival from Pill Hill Press. He is best known for his insightful interviews and profiles in Carpe Noctem Magazine, Fangoria Magazine, and on Dread Central and TwitchFilm.com. Carnell is a graduate of the San Francisco College of Mortuary Science and worked as a certified eye nucleist and a registered polysomnographic technologist. His novels, No Flesh Shall Be Spared, No Flesh Shall Be Spared, Don't Look Back, and short story collections Moonlight Serenades, A String of Pearls, and Tuxedo Junction are available through Amazon.com and Crossroad Press. He currently lives in Bellingham, Washington. All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Mighty Books Podcast. Today we have Thom Carnell. How you doing, Tom?
I'm well. Thank you, sir.
Awesome. I'm grateful for you to take time out of your schedule to meet with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah. So first off, I know this is going to be a bigger question, but what are the title or titles of your books?
Let's see. There are 3 Carpe Noctem books, which are interviews with people over the years while I was doing Carpe Noctem back in the 90s. When Neil Gaiman sits down for an hour with you and says, let me tell you about writing, and then talks for 3 hours. Yeah, it's that kind of stuff. So all of that's there. There's 2 zombie books, No Flesh Shall Be Spared and No Flesh Shall Be Spared, Don't Look Back. The pitch on that has been Gladiator meets Dawn of the Dead. So it's like the UFC where the fighters punch your undead grandma and that kind of thing. Very muscly, very sort of adventure-y. And then there's a whole slew. There's Moonlight Serenades, String of Pearls, Tuxedo Junction, and Horror Book, which are all short story collections. Horror Book just came out, and then I'm just finishing up something. All of the stories that were written in the order they were written during the last 2 years of the pandemic. And it's going to be called Tales from the Lazaretto. And Lazaretto was a hospital that they used to put leprosy patients while they waited to die or get better or whatever. So,
oh man.
So a lot of that has to do. All of the new stuff has a lot to do with that and death, which is kind of a thing with me.
Yeah. Okay.
And then after that, I'm doing a book. It's planned to do a book on. I worked for Tower Records for 10 years, and it's going to be a book. The pitch on that has been Empire Records meets Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. Lots of drugs, lots of sex, no monsters, no gore, no nothing. Just, basically how my wife and I met.
Oh, okay.
Because I owe that to her because, happy wife, happy life.
So how long have you been writing for? It looked like it's been a decent amount of time.
Well, I kind of got into it through a side door where this will date me, but back in the Prodigy days, there was this group called Alt Horror, and we would go there and we would talk. And it was all like message board stuff where you would post a note and then maybe like 3 days later, someone would go, I agree. So as a result of that, I got into film critique and writing about film. The tangibility of putting my thoughts onto the keyboard and someone responding was kind of cool back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. But lifelong, like my mom was a person who I talk a lot about how I was raised Demillian. For theology wise, because my mom's idea of a religious experience was watching a Cecil B. DeMille film, the 10 Commandments is on, you're going to get some Jesus in you. And we sit down, and I never understood why Moses was on the Planet of the Apes. So it's been this lifelong thing with movies. And then in the 80s, I went to work for Tower Records and a lot of other record stores. Thought I was going to save the world with a guitar. Met my wife, and shortly thereafter, I went to a goth club, and they were having this thing called a zine slam, where it was like small press, Fact Sheet 5, if anyone remembers that kind of stuff. So I went there, and I was like, wow, this is everything that I do for nothing, just at my house. And so my wife got her Broadway eyes on, and suddenly she's like, we could just do a magazine. And that was the beginning of Carpe Noctem. And Carpe Noctem ran until 2000, at which point I went to work for Tony Timpone at Fangoria, and I did that for about 10 years. And then I went to work for Dread Central and Twitch.com, and I was doing a lot of convention panels. And but I don't have a high opinion of a lot of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Horror cons tend to be the same 10 people talking about the same 8 films over and over and over again. And if you come there with any sort of world view of cinema, it's like, no. Look at this. This is the cool stuff. Forget about Hellraiser and Chucky. Look at this. Here's a Serbian film, or here's something that's really going to knock the meat up your bones,
Mm-hmm.
And all around that time, I was always telling people stories and making shit up. I don't know if I can cuss on here. Can I?
Yeah, we'll try to keep it a little lower.
Okay.
So, I mean,
it just comes out. So,
I get it.
Around that time, I started No Flesh Shall Be Spared. Through all of this runs martial arts, where Japanese sword, and that took me to Muay Thai, and that took me to JKD and Filipino martial arts now. And now it's just mayhem. It's just knife fighting, and and it really drove home the idea that I needed to do that all because I was writing a book about fighting, and I'm kind of an immersive guy, where it's like, if I'm going to go work on in Moonlight Serenades, I did a story called Clown Town, which is all about clowns. And so I went to the local clown guild and hung out with them. And that's where I found all of this really rich language of like a cross between like real circus speak and like jazz lingo and, things that are so cool. They're Jake, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
That kind of like very lyrical kind of language. And so through that, it's now slowly whittled away, where I got tired of talking to other people about their stuff. And I decided just to hone in on my storytelling and the things that I think are interesting, and the things that I think have a great potential to be very, very disturbing, even though they don't have anything to do with, Dracula or those same 8 films, right? I'm trying to think of an example. In the new book, there's a story called Stuck, and it has to do with a girl alone in a laundry room of a dorm, dropping her phone, and then she gets stuck between the washer dryer and the wall. And that really happened, and the girl died and stuff. For me, I'm like, wow. I mean, chest gets compressed and it becomes hard to breathe. That right there is just something that commonplace thing you find in the newspaper. But break into that, crack that open, start looking at individual moments, and you can find some real potential for some terrifying stuff. In horror book, I looked at hunger and food in a story called Assyrians, and how our relationship with food and what happens when that goes bad, both to the positive, not the positive, but the plus, where someone's gaining a lot of weight, like right. Say in the movie Feed, if you've ever seen the movie Feed, or the other side, where hypothetically, if someone is doing, let's say, caloric deprivation, and what if they couldn't start again? What if you stopped eating to lose weight, or because you were busy? And what if you couldn't start again? So those are the kind of things where I think genre can work really well. But everyone's a sucker for a zombie story or what have you.
Yeah, it's a household genre in its own right. In horror, you have zombie as its own niche, as it would be, and people are like, oh, zombie, let's go check that out. They've got a lot of.
My problem with zombies has always been like, it's all I'm going to make up a word here, Romerian, right? It's very George Romero, where we're living our normal life, and suddenly there's these creatures at the door, and what do? We can't let them in. It's the siege story, right? And then once you lock it down, it's just those characters, sort of bouncing off of each other and stuff. So, but it's always about the event, and it rarely goes into, what happens 10 years later.
Yeah.
We're seeing that now. What happens at 10 years after a pandemic when everyone's been affected and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Did not see not believing in the zombies coming.
Yeah.
But and it's a great way. I think that storytelling is a way to address topics that you don't get to do in regular fiction or life and death and those big questions.
Mm-hmm. You almost get allowed to almost get a free range on, you can talk and do whatever you want in horror, and you can describe it in intimate detail. Detail, which is kind of cool if you're open to that and open to the genre and that kind of content. It can be pretty interesting to read about.
Yeah, some people lean into that a little too much, I think. I don't want to call anyone out, but it's like that's hyper gore kind of stuff. I get it, but those are rites of passage, right? People, as they tend to age through their teens and into their 20s, like death becomes a real consideration, especially as you get older. It becomes a real consideration. So I get the idea why you have to, speaking in film, why you have to sort of check out guinea pig, you have to, or Serbian film, or this new thing, the sadness. You got it. There's a part of you that slows down at traffic accidents. I want to see this, right? But on the other hand, I equate it to candy. It's like candy's fun, but you better not be existing just on candy.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
And you need to sit down, and I talk a lot about time in the chair, where it's like, whether it's film or if it's music or if it's books, it's not about people talking about it. It's about you sitting in that chair hour after hour, watching film after film, listening to record after record, and doing the work. And this is an old man talking, but I don't see that a lot. I see a lot of people like, well, I haven't heard of that. I've never heard of In a Glass Cage, so I don't care about it. It's like, oh, but you should. Mm-hmm. You should see that movie, In a Glass Cage. That makes Apt Pupil look like Romper Room. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think it's let me put it this way. I feel like creativity is this giant machine. And at one end is a lot of people gathered around, and they're all smoking cigarettes, and they're all drinking their coffee, and they're all pontificating about what they're going to do. And then as you sort of move down the line, you start seeing less and less of them as the project starts becoming more tangible, as words are hitting the page. And then when you go all the way down at the other end of the machine where the finished product comes out, very few people standing there waiting. So it's important to be able to have fellowship with these people and go commiserate as writers. But it's also important to know that, people talk a lot of shit, and everyone wants to seem busy, even if they're not. And I'm a big advocate of staring out the window, you know what I mean? Like, that's such an important part of writing, that no one in this world of social media and Twitter and all that other stuff, it's like, that's not what I do. Everything that makes me a good writer makes me a terrible promoter. Because how do you, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like, how do you go back to a normal life, right? When you've been God for an hour all afternoon in the afternoon, you've been God. You've anything you want, you can make things up. But then you go out and you have to deal with the guy at Costco that doesn't understand why they don't take coupons. Yeah. It's like, what do you?
That's actually a great dichotomy to chat about. Is you go in there and you are, like I said, you're essentially omnipotent. Yeah. You can decide whether a person lives, dies, has a festive life, has a wonderful life, is miserable. Mm-hmm. And then you leave, and now you're kind of at the mercy of, now you're the character. You're the one at the mercy of. And I just think it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting dichotomy. And that does take a special, and the idea of what makes you a good writer definitely doesn't make you a good promoter. That I've seen, especially with fiction writers, that because we're creating, like, because I'm a fiction writer, I create, and you're not teaching anybody. You're opening this window into kind of your mind, your soul, of what it be, and you're putting it on paper for people to read. You're not teaching anybody. It's a different mindset. If you're teaching something, if you're writing down like, hey, I'm learning a skill, want people to learn this skill, you're going to promote that skill because that's how you teach. You learn the skill that way. You were taught by other people. But when you write down a story that's very intimate for yourself or, personal or whatever, it's a little harder to kind of showcase, put on display. You know what I mean?
Right. I would talk a lot about how writer and reader, as the writer's writing and the reader's reading together, they make this single imagining unit, right? That works together. That if the writer's smart, he can play off things, he can spark things with certain moments, or even certain words, that they have different impact. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's okay. That happens. We're talking about a whole lot of stuff, so that's totally okay. That's what. Yeah. Oh, I want to quickly go back to the gore part. I thought it was kind of interesting when you that fresh people who are pretty young and new and getting into like the horror aspect. It almost gets to the point where like the gore almost becomes comic. Like what you almost and I found as I got older, I want more realistic things. I don't want it to just blow up because the car blew up because it ran into that wall. That doesn't make sense.
It drove off the cliff
and it blows up. Yeah, like why doesn't make any sense? No, it's just supposed to roll down and the people inside are now injured or they're deceased. No, I don't need to blow up for extra effect. Just the fact of it rolling off, that's drama enough. I don't need the extra.
Sure. The 100-foot fall. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not going to live through that. They don't need to blow up.
I think I'm of the opinion that your story concept is this, as Alana said, a jagged little pill that you've got to put in your mouth and you swallow. There are creatures that exist that live by night that suck the blood of the living. Okay, great. That's a pretty big ask for the reader to go, okay, that's what I'm signing on for. So in my opinion, everything else has to be legit. Like in the zombie book, the pill was the dead are coming back to life and people fight them on like WWE on TV. Okay. From there, everything has to be legit. You can't, there's no magic shit that goes on. A big pet peeve of mine is people that write about, let's say, fighting and who've never fought.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's not method, but I just find it's in my experience that by going out and like, I'm writing a story about guns, so I'm going to go out and shoot guns with someone who knows what they're doing. Few years ago for the second zombie book, I didn't understand what det cord is. And then so a guy I knew that worked in the DOD was like, come on, let's go blow some shit up. And it was illuminating because you get these sense things, right? Because the reader is essentially sitting in a room in the dark, blind, and with his hands over his ears, and only is able to imagine the stuff that you give him. And if that sort of rings true, I almost wanted to put a stamp on the zombie books that like all of these books are fight approved. Like I've gone out with a bunch of people and it all works and it's all feasible. So, but a lot of times you get those, those things that they're just too much. There's zombies, but then there's other things that keep piling on. And then the lead balloon of disbelief becomes harder and harder to keep aloft.
If you open it with it like you say it's a fantasy, that's a little different. It's a different world, fantasy, there's different rules and laws. That opens the reader up to pretty much anything is possible according to what the author writes. But I think the most horrifying thing, the wonderful thing about horror is they take things that could actually happen and that are feasible or heck have even happened in the past, and they illustrate it in intimate detail very well on a piece of paper for someone to digest and to kind of understand and put them in the character's shoes. That is horrifying. If you can do that, you've done your job as a horror writer. Actually, as a writer, period. But especially,
I think there's also those people out there. They have this filmmakers too. They have this deck of cards, right? And so they shuffle them and they start dealing them out. We have a guy who works as a lawyer and he encounters a girl and you're just like, oh yeah, like I'd rather have you fail miserably than do something that rote. Yeah, after a while, they get kind of,
it gets cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, where there is a formula to a story, it just the hero's journey, it's a thing, but it is a story, and it's a path, a way of thinking that people eat up, even to this day. They eat. I mean, it's thousands of years old.
Sure.
But yeah, if you can throw a wrench in that a little bit and spin it up, people will take note of it, and they'll enjoy the living dickens out of it.
Oh yeah, that's especially, or you can even taking things from a different perspective.
Oh yeah.
In Moonlight Serenades, I did a story called Another One for the Fire, and it's a short thing, but it's the 2 minutes of footage at the very beginning of Night of the Living Dead, and it ends with her saying they ought to make the time change the first day of fall or whatever. I forget the line. Yeah. And so you can find these moments, and I find, like, I'm a big Peckinpah fan, so like you take something and just slow it down, and you can find this unbelievable. I talk a lot about if you know what an exploding schematic is, right? Yeah. Where you see something and it's blown out.
Yep.
Over the years, the ability, I've sort of been working really hard on the ability to stop that moment. Any moment that I'm moving along, stop that moment, blow it out, walk inside, metaphorically, inside, kind of look around and go, you know what? I didn't think about this. I didn't see that. Or, hey, look at this cool thing that could potentially happen.
Yeah, and that is super important, especially for action, And I found one of my favorite things to write about is action scenes. I love writing two things: dialogue and action scene. Dialogue can make some funny stuff happen, really impactful stuff, but action scenes. And what's hilarious is they're not very fast. They're not very long. If you make them good,
short sentences.
Yeah, a lot of short sentences. You kind of pick up the tempo. It's almost like a composer. Pick up the tempo a little bit.
And you don't have to worry too much about those little, like, asides. You can do an entire paragraph. He did this. He did that. He went here. He did that.
You're moving fast. And then I've got. So I want to level with you with the martial arts. I did martial arts for like 10 years. I absolutely love it. I want to get back into it. It's been years since I've done it. Just family.
What style?
Oh gosh, I did Taekwondo. I did Judo, and a little. I did some bow staff work, which was really fun, and then a little bit of Kempo.
Okay.
So, all kind of conglomerate. I did Taekwondo was the heavy one. But anyway, what I found was when I was writing the characters who actually did a lot of combat, I kind of sat there. I would literally get out of the chair and I'd mime how someone would punch, what the reaction was, someone defending was. It'd be interesting if you read some of those and kind of give me feedback on that.
Absolutely.
I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. Yeah.
My poor kids grew up going, stand like this. And then I'm moving around going like, all right.
Yeah. But it takes that you have to, you kind of get off the keyboard for a second. You go, okay, how is he going to, he gets knocked on his, he gets knocked down. How does he fall? Because that's important. Okay, now what can he do? Can he access the guy's knee? Okay, can he take the knee out?
Right.
Or is he completely defenseless?
Right. Yeah. And what's realistic, right? I don't need this mild mannered lawyer suddenly throwing a capoeira kick, right? I just
yeah. Unless there's a deeper backstory to him and you don't know about it yet. But that's a different animal.
Yeah. Well, in the first the zombie book, there's a sparring scene between the main male lead, and the female lead, and I keep equating it to sex because it's the second most intimate thing you could do is fight someone. So I also equate a lot of the stories I do to dancing or sex, or like it's this intense moment. I'm going to say a bad word here. I call them shitter reads.
Okay.
So like you sit down to go to the restroom, and in that 20 minutes or 15 minutes, 10 minutes that you're going to the bathroom, you've gone to another planet for this, just this little tiny 5,000 word tale. And then you're there, it's intensely intimate. And then, you try to remember to leave the money on the dresser.
That's awesome. That's hilarious. Oh, good stuff. Let's see. Okay, so it sounds like horror was kind of it kind of came natural. So you kind of just naturally just ebbed that way into the horror genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Again, I grew up with mamas and big movies. There was a guy back when I was about 8 or 9 or maybe even 10. I lived in the Bay Area. A guy named Bob Wilkins was the local horror host on KTVU.
Okay.
Did a show called Creature Features. Bob was huge in my life, where he was a regular guy into monster movies and creatures and science fiction. And he was normal. He wasn't Zachary. He wasn't, Vampira at the time. Elvira wasn't around yet. So it was super influential on me. And then as I blossomed into a reader, then it became, that was all where all the excitement was. I didn't want to read Wuthering Heights. I want Clive Barker ripping someone's face off. Right. So then there's all these movies and books and everything else. And then as I grew up and entered into my 20s, I got married and I needed a real job. I couldn't work at Tower forever because that's silly.
Yeah.
And that's when I went to mortuary college and I worked in funeral homes for a long time. So it's kind of always been there, a respectful sort of nod across the street to death, continually through my life. Like when I was 15, we lost like 7 members of our family at different times and all this stuff. So it was always there. But it's kind of a weird progression, right? The Bob Wilkins thing and then the funeral home thing. And that taught me poignancy and how you can still frighten someone and rip their heart out at the same time. After that, that's when all of the writing stuff started to happen.
Right.
And it's for me, it's about time now where, give me 3 characters and a location you have access to, and I can give you something creepy going on. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, all of that has ruined cinema. It's like one of those things where he opens the drawer and there's a gun inside, and you're suddenly Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, right? Kind of a thing. Like, hey, that's going to come into play.
Yeah.
And my wife's the worst at it. She'll look at me 20 minutes into a movie and go, "So that guy did it, right?" And I'm like, and it's all, it's formula.
It is.
I'd say there's only 60 stories out there or something.
Yeah, everything's a spinoff. I kind of feel like everything's a spinoff of a spinoff. And I mean, you can find good stuff, but I find as I get older, I read and watch less newer things or mainstream things. And I'm reading and watching more things have been created back, I would say even as far back as the 60s. 60s, 70s, 80s, kind of in that area, sometimes 90s too. And then books, I'm finding a lot more independent folks who are doing hybrid, marketing or not marketing, publishing, someone who's not in the mainstream, someone's got a little different idea, different way of looking at things. And it's a lot more appealing than just the normal. It really is. It's just less BS and more straight to it. I like it better.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Because otherwise it's like, it feels less like a product that way.
It feels more genuine.
Yeah.
It's closer to the streets as maybe we'll find it. Well, so that was actually a follow-up to our, you said mortuary college. I wanted to hear some about that. I read that in your bio and I'm like, I want to hear about this. I want to hear about how did you even go like, I'm going to go to mortuary college. What inspired that?
I was looking around for work after Tower wasn't working, so and discovered that there was 50 miles away a college up in San Francisco that it was a 1-year curriculum that you could come out of it with a bachelor's. And so I did that, and it was just driving to San Francisco every day and being dumped into the stuff you would imagine, anatomy classes and embalming classes, but also, funeral law and psychology. And because you're sharing time with people you've never met before at the
worst time in their lives.
Absolutely. And in the middle of this, I have to ask you for 10 grand.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I'm so sorry for your loss, but here's a check, or here's a bill for a lot of money.
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah, and that's hard.
and knowing, what, trying to infuse, my problem became one of trying to infuse humanity back into it, and not, I worked for a company called SCI, Service Corporation International, who, if you ever watch 6 Feet Under, they were the model for Kroger, because they are horrible individuals. It's all about bottom line, and it's all about, sell them a single flower, tell them it's customary to put for the family to put a single flower in the casket. Well, no, it's not customary. You just want to bump up, the funeral shop that right. That kind of thing. It's just horrible. But on the other hand, I was honored to stand in rooms that were intense. Look, I know this is your mom, but I kind of got to get her up off the floor. You know what I mean? That kind of a thing. Crying, coming home and crying every day, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, my wife said to me, if you come home and aren't moved by what you've seen in the day, there's something wrong.
There is something absolutely.
And then one day I came home and didn't feel moved, and that's when I left.
The fact that you had the wherewithal, that you observed that and you took account of that's very important. It's huge. It's a very mature thing to do. And to go, okay, I've done this. How long did you do it for?
About 10 years.
Okay. I mean, the fact that it took 10 years,
and that was more
numb to it. It's like,
exactly. Well, there's a reason. I went to a funeral director convention once, and holy mackerel, I thought rock stars drank. These guys are pounding booze, and I was just like, holy mackerel. And that was a whole surreal experience too. You're walking down the hallway of a convention, and there's a embalming fluid, and you've tried the rest, now try the best. What?
We're not selling like orange juice, we're selling embalming fluid. Okay.
I know. And so the other part of it was that was really tough was, the awe-inspiring thing that is the body, right? Doing the actual embalming and the prep work and learning all of that stuff. It continues to leave me with just this awe of the body and what it's capable of, and how the odds are greater that you drop dead than you live that next minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what a not a miracle, but because has all those connotations, but it's wild,
Very impressive.
So it came to a point where I'd been cried on too much, I'd been leaned on too much, and it was starting to have an adverse effect.
I can see that. Actually, it's interesting tidbit. Have you ever read the book Flags of Our Fathers? Okay.
Oh yeah.
In the author's father, who's actually in the picture at Iwo Jima,
okay,
he opened up his own funeral home in their hometown, and apparently of the group of five that were in the picture, right? He was the most, I would say, successful. He was the one who actually had a family with a business. That was what they deemed, successful, family with business. And he hadn't died of terrible things or committed suicide or anything awful.
There was a movie about one of the guys, I remember.
Well, Flags of Our Fathers was out, and I believe it was that group.
Right. No, before that, there was a film where someone played the guy whose hand couldn't reach as they were pushing it up. The one that's away from the pole. Okay. I want to say he was American Indian or something like that. I forget it was
for Iwo Jima.
No, it's something else. I want to say somebody like Tony Curtis or Robert Blake or something was in it. It was from the years ago. So
but anyway, I always found it interesting that he leaned towards that area, but it made sense because he was a very stoic individual beforehand. After the war, he even was more so. Very polished, he only spoke, and when he did speak, it was direct. It wasn't when I was no fluff and stuff. This is exactly what it was.
Lots of those guys,
yeah. And so I found it interesting as someone who saw such horrific things in Iwo Jima and dealt with things like that he aimed towards the comforting almost of he talked with people, knew him as the one you go to when you're loved ones pass away. And it was very interesting that dichotomy between war and funeral home operating was kind of interesting. And the fact that he lived right up to, I can't remember when he passed away, but he died of just natural causes, surrounded by family and friends, doing a good job. So it was interesting to get that insight.
Yeah. I used to work with a guy, Keith, who used to always say, old Southern guy, he used to say, like, we got one shot, one kill, one chance to get it right. Like, yeah, you're right. Because you know what? I said just recently in something I was writing about how, like, everyone will forget if the bride stumbles on the way up to the altar, but put mom in a wrong box.
Oh,
that's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
So, but I'm grateful because it gave me this sort of
insight.
For want of a better word. And it doesn't change anything. You still have those same things as a human, but being around that, I think it's important. We don't do that anymore as Americans. We used to, there used to be viewings used to take place at your house. They'd bring a casket in with dry ice underneath it.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, back in the Old West and stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
so,
man.
but now it's all farmed out. It's all farmed out to hospice. It's farmed out to retirement facilities and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We've lost our respect for it,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It could have also changed, but I don't know if people want to associate their homes with where they held the eulogy or the viewing of their, dead relative.
I'm a jerk, so I would counter with, but that's your mom.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah. At the same time, it's a place where you honored them. You could say that's a place where you honored their life, and we got to view them one last time as a family. You know what I mean? I
just remember like arrangement conferences where like we haven't even signed anything, and they're already like, "Well, who gets mom's ring?"
Oh yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure that gets some nasty conversations.
I would have to go. Excuse me.
You guys
because I don't want any part of that.
Yeah, you guys can bicker about that.
On the other hand, I had to explain to a guy once why we couldn't have an open bar at the visitation.
As sad as death and funerals are, I'm sure you've got some funny stories that go along with some of them. I'm sure there's some people do some silly stuff when they're grieving.
There was a time when, and I shouldn't probably mention this, but I was going to do a book where go to across the country 100 funeral directors and ask for their top poignant, scary, funny stories.
Yeah,
and just collect them all. Because Rack on Tour doesn't even come close. I used to know a guy, Sam Campagna, who I don't know, he might have already passed, but he was hilarious. Would walk up to you, pat you on the back, and say, "Did you get the money?" Dude, what are you doing to me?
You're gonna give me a heart attack, man. What are
you yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh my God.
But it all informs. Like a lot of my stuff, even back with Carpe Noctem, it was never about like death being this horrible specter. I just finished a story for Lazaretto called Advent that death is a 55-year-old little Filipino man that works maintenance at a hospital. So I find it mostly, my approach has been death positive.
Okay.
In a weird way. Even in the midst of tragedy, even in the midst of something like Wedding Day in Moonlight Serenades, where in the midst of that, there's still great love and there's still great.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard, and I'm sure this quote's been said before, but what it's basically grief, and grief is essentially the feeling of grief is love with nowhere to go.
Yeah,
Sure. I thought that was very appropriate for that situation. I'm like, yeah, I mean, essentially, you love the person, you can't give it to them, and they're gone. And now, what do you do with it? You cry about it, you grieve over it, and you try to live your best life without being able to showcase it. So,
right.
Yeah.
And and it's one of those things. Spouses. I remember a lady who had a husband for like 55 years or something. He passed, and the service was over. Everyone was packing up to go to the graveside, and she was just sitting there, just sort of with this struck in the face with a shovel kind of dazed look on her face.
Yeah.
And I sat down with her and I go, are you okay? Is there anything you need? And she just looked at me like a kid, wide-eyed, and just goes, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, I'd go talk to your daughter or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Wow. That's heavy. The implication of all of that is so heavy.
Yeah.
I used to know a guy who did a sketchy survey about the 2-year thing, right? Where when someone of long-term marriage, when someone dies, usually within 2 years, that other person will pass, or when they do pass, it'll be within 2 months of the spouse's death. Even if it's 10 or 15 years later, it'll be within 2 months of that.
Oh, really?
Kind of weird. No way to document that, how accurate that is, but
Yeah. That's wow. That'd be something. That'd be very interesting to look back and see if there's a trend or.
Yeah, but it also threw me in this weird direction of trying to redefine. Like there was times when I was working at funeral homes where there was a lot of. I was talking to clergy all the time and just trying to get an idea of like, well, who's right and what's right, and it ended up reshaping the way I look at life in that it is experiential. It's not this trajectory. It's one moment of experience after the other, and the stuff that we carry with us. And so anyway, well, and it all gets very heavy and
oh yeah. Well, and I think that's something people need, and hopefully they do, is when they get to the acceptance part, they take what they just went through and they go experience life and enjoy it. Take opportunity, take the chances, take the risks, hug and kiss your loved ones,
yeah, absolutely.
Go out, walk barefoot, do whatever you want to go do, experience, because we are only here on this planet for a finite amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I used to do panels at I've done them at Crypticon and a couple of others, called Ask the Embalmer. And the idea was, ask me a question and I'll answer it until you tell me to stop. And everyone always told me to stop because, and then I had to learn the hard way about asking follow-up questions because it's like, well, tell me about an autopsy. And so I'm all blah, 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 blah. Why do you ask? Oh, well, my mom died last week and okay. But on the other hand, I'll tell you what, whenever I would go to cons, I need a handler because I'm easily distracted and smoke a lot of weed and all that other shit. So my daughter does that, walks with me around. And we were sitting in a room after one of the Ask the Embalmer panels, and there were people openly crying in the auditorium. And like, she just walked up and she was like, what the hell was that? What happened here? Because everyone, it was the first time that they could ask questions and someone wouldn't fill their head with euphemism,
Yeah. You shout out to them straight, essentially. It's like, which is good to do. I mean, people sometimes people want the fairy tale, and some people want the blunt answers.
And that's why I gave them the out of saying like, I'm good, thank you.
So okay, conventions. We kind of segued to conventions there. Again, I was going through your website. I saw a couple of pictures with some celebs up there. I thought it was kind of cool. Norman Reedus from Walking Dead was on there. I'm a big fan of Norman Reedus. I like him.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
I have if you go to the video page on my website, there's a 10-part video of a thing we did called Drinking with the Boondock Saints.
Yeah.
It was me, a guy named Sean Smithson, Norman, and Sean Patrick Flannery.
No way.
Getting hammered.
I love Boondock Saints.
And it just went off the rails. But because of the Fango thing and the Carpe Noctem thing, I'm grateful because, again, I was able to sit at people's knee, for the longest time. I mentioned Gaiman, but everyone that's in the Carpe Noctem, Frank Miller, Clive. For a while there, I was interviewing Clive once a year, and so. When you sit and you listen to someone like that, the content of what they're saying is mind-blowing, but more important was watching their demeanor. Like, this is how someone acts that's successful. You notice that he's not telling everybody what he's up to, and he's not trying to be the life of the party. He's a pro, and he sits over there because he's been on this movie set 1,000 times before. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And just that whole demeanor of like, oh, okay, there's a swag to someone who is successful and good at what they do, you know?
The confidence.
And that's, yeah, and the Cons did the same thing, you know. We did a one-on-one fireside chat with Romero, where we were talking about stuff. Even he was like, where, you know, Bill Moseley was like, where do you get this stuff? Because I'm a big digger. So like we talked a lot about The Red Shoes and Tales of Hoffman and all of these films that I knew from other interviews that Tales of Hoffman, him and Scorsese used to always be battling in New York, because they would go to the film library, and if Romero tried to get Tales of Hoffman, he couldn't get it because Scorsese had it, and vice versa. So those kind of things, growing up and what are they into? And again, when I found out Barry Bostwick was a potter, it's like, find what they geek over and dig in there, and you can't get away from them. Yeah. You know what I mean? So yeah, but then there's been these moments through the years of just meeting people who are very successful and really good at what they do, and knowing that, like, I've met very few dicks, you know, real jerks.
Yeah.
There's been a couple. Danny Filth is a real piece of work.
Oh no.
You know, there's been a couple that have been just horrible. But you know.
Yeah. So how long ago were those interviews? I'll go on there and check it out after we're done here.
Yeah, they some of them were back in the 90s. You know, like Miller was just talking about Sin City. He was just getting Sin City going. And the thing with the Miller thing that's fun is we played like a lightning round where I'm like, Clive Barker, and he goes, oh, can that guy, you know, da 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 da. What do you think of this guy? What do you think of this guy? And that's, so it was always something. And you know, even people who you kind of think like, I don't know about this, you know, I don't know that this is going to be a good interview. Then all of a sudden, like midway through, you're like fast friends, you know.
You know, that's fantastic. I love that with the interviews. I would say this is my first time, like just in the last year, doing interviews. This is the first time actually conducting interviews, and every single time I've done an interview, I've learned more about the person, which is great, and then we've developed kind of a, you know, quick friendship and been able to collaborate on this and that, chit chat, hit up everybody. Hey, how you doing? It kind of just, it brings everyone down to everyone's level. It's like, we're all just people just living here doing our thing.
And the reality is like, it's symbiotic, right? Yeah. I need you for my podcast, and you need me for the promotionary aspect, you know. But the higher you, the air quotes again, higher you go up, and you start doing these studio junkets, that sucks, you know. When there's a funny little movie called Bunraku out there, Ron Perlman's in it, whatever. But it was like, they were just sitting in a room, and then it would be like, okay, here's Ron Oliver, click, and then hi, and then they would talk for 10 minutes, and then some publicist would step in and go, okay, that's it, time's up, and then they would just throw you out of there. And it's just like, but it takes me 20 minutes to get up to speed, you know, and to develop rapport and to develop credibility, right? Because you know,
it just takes time. Yeah. Well, I mean, even just,
but they are nice people.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Yeah, some are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're gonna find a dash of douchery as you go around. I mean, it's just
especially because they're artists and they're actors and they're filmmakers, and everyone's on the spectrum, and everyone's you know what I mean. Everyone's like an auteur, and I get it. You know, I absolutely. I'll tell you, one of the things that got me the best was I was doing press for I, Frankenstein, which is it's fine. It's I, Frankenstein. And I was talking with Ron Balicki, who was the fight coordinator there, and Ron's a legend in my world. He's just a badass. But he's married to a lady named Diana Lee Inosanto, and Diana, she was the magistrate who fought Ahsoka Tano in Mandalorian. Diana, her dad is a guy named Dan Inosanto, and Dan was like second to Bruce Lee in all of Bruce's stuff. Yeah. Right. So we're sitting there talking, and she says, "Oh yeah, I would come home from school regularly, and my dad would just be finishing up with one of his classes, and in the living room would be James Gardner and Steve McQueen and James Coburn, and this made me stop." She goes, "Oh, and of course Uncle Bruce." And I was just like, "Whoa. Yeah," I go, "You got to give me a minute. You've got to give me a minute on this." Yeah, Bruce was her godfather.
No way.
Yeah. Oh, and she is, look her up. Yeah. She has a film of her own called The Sensei that she directed back, I want to say, in the 2000s. But
what's her name? What's her name again?
Diana Lee Inosanto.
Okay.
She's this beautiful lady.
Okay. I will look her up.
Badass.
Yeah. I'll look her up. Yeah. Anyone who calls Bruce Lee Uncle Bruce, I want to.
She's the bomb. She does a lot of spike choreography. Ron does a lot. He does a lot of choreography, of the good choreography in Seagal movies and a couple other. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Ron's. You can find a bunch of his tutorial training videos on YouTube.
Okay.
D-Lot and Kali and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, kind of segue with interviews and whatnot. You said you do a radio show, and then you used to do a podcast years ago.
Yeah, we did. Let's see. We started in the 2010 with the Night Crew. It was me, Sean Smithson, Heather Buckley, Phil Nutman, David Del Valle. It was like a evening magazine, but for horror.
Oh, okay.
I did a 13 episode primer on Japanese samurai film. Phil Nutman, who is he's passed now, but he wrote a book called Wet Work, and he was an authority on Amicus films. Mm-hmm. He would come on and he did a thing on Westerns, a whole primer on Westerns. So we did that for a long time, and then that sort of dissipated. I did a small podcast called Act of Will, where I interviewed people that weren't genre, where it was like Scott Sonnen, who's a nutritionist and a motion, he teaches Russian Sambo, Jeff Tate from Queensryche, that kind of thing. And then I just stopped. And then a while later, a guy named Langley J. West and I did bonus material. And it was basically a 2-hour podcast. First hour was an interview. Second hour was reviewing movies and news and going through that week's trailer films. And that put me in the room with a lot of, very cool people. I remember Langley coming over at like 3 a.m. so we could call Italy to talk to Giovanni Lombardo Radici, who, if you've ever seen Fulci's Gates of Hell, he's the guy that gets the drill through the side of the head. He was in a bunch of Fulci movies. He was in Cannibal Ferox, which I know everyone's a big fan of. Third world cannibal film like Cannibal Holocaust or
okay. Wow. And so the radio host.
So the radio show is radio show. It's all music. It's an hour long. It's called Carnell Knowledge. It's on KMRE 102.3 FM here in Bellingham, Washington. Oh, okay. There is no format. It's really whatever I want. The model has been sort of an old movie horror host. There's lots of audio clips. The one episode that airs tonight begins with this beginning speech from Seagal's Above the Law. There's a break in the middle that has somebody telling a really unflattering Steven Seagal story. And just a lot of music. I listen to everything from, I've been going through a big 60s sort of bachelor pad spy thing, like, Esquivel or Martin Denny and that kind of thing. I'm a big fan of the guitar wizardry, and, a lot of times I'll play music that you have heard your whole life, but you don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. When you hear it, you go, oh. Lawrence Welk Calcutta is one of those songs where you just go, when you hear it, you go, oh, I've heard this forever.
Right.
And it's always like in the background at when they're in some department store, but it's great stuff.
Okay.
I just did a 15-minute block of Lawrence Welk songs, which is hilarious. Yeah, it's fun, but it's just a way it's what I do normally. That's most of my music consumption. And this is just a byproduct. Now, when I hear something I like, I just throw it onto a list and then,
right.
And then I can
let everyone else hear it too.
Yeah. Lately I've been into a lot of Cambodian rock from the 60s.
Yeah.
Because there was really cool, like surf kind of, pop stuff going on in Cambodia. And then the Khmer Rouge came in and just shut it down. And so after the Khmer Rouge was driven out, most of the pop stars had already been killed because they murdered a bunch of artists because they were subversive. So all of that talent pool is just gone, but this music is out there. There's a great compilation called Cambodia Rocks that you can get. That it's cool. It's different. You have to adjust. It's like when you're watching a film, like a Pakistani horror film, you have to adjust your thinking. Or even when you're watching something, we just watched one of the OSS 117 movies, and it's in the early 60s. So, like women are treated poorly and they're called dames and what have you. And you can be mad about it. Yeah. But I'd rather just adjust my thinking to go, okay, it's 1962. And
right. Look at the context of when it was made. Understand that we know we don't believe that now, but just that's what they believed back then. And that's
right.
Historically more accurate anyway.
Yeah. And all that gets in the way of the critical thing, and that's the story.
Yeah. Right. That to me is vital. If you don't have a good story, you don't got anything. I mean, you're just looking at people doing stuff.
I equate it to like your story is your foundation.
Yeah.
And your first draft is your framing.
Yeah.
And every time you go through it, you're making it better. You're putting up drywall, you're putting in electrics. And when you get to the point that you're adjusting picture frames, you're done.
Yeah. That's a great analogy.
Because one of the hard lessons is learning when to let something go.
Yeah.
Clive once said to me that at some point you have to let it go and devote all of that energy into the new thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. And that takes some skill. That takes some time, and you need to let that go. It's just, you're holding this thing. You're like, I've held on to it to the chest so long. When do I let it into the world to make her, live or die on its laurels, and that takes some skill.
And you can screw that up. I've let things go a couple times that I go, shouldn't have done that.
Well, the cool thing is too, but what I love about writing is you can always pull the thing back and go, well, let's analyze this again. Let's revamp this, because you already had, like you said, you already had the foundation. You got the story there. You've got the framework. Maybe I have to knock down that wall and rebuild it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Take this chapter. I had to do it with my first book. I wrote my book when I was 16. I started when I was 16. And I ended it when I was 31. I got it published when 31. So there was, 15, 16 years of writing development. My skill, my style, my level of confidence grew huge. So I read a story, I read a couple chapters from when I was 16, 17, that when I finally got to reading it to edit, I was like, this is hot trash. I need to just start over. And I got really worried because the first half of the book was written when I was a kid. I would say 16 to 23, 24. And then I had a long pause, and about 28, 29 is when I jumped back into it. So that time frame I developed a lot better.
Sure.
And so
maturity comes into play.
That is just life experience. I had, I've been married for X amount of time. I had two kids at this point in time. I'd worked a lot more, seen and heard a lot of different things. Anyway, and I'm like, I have got to revisit this. And I literally chucked those out of the draft and started fresh on those chapters. I was like, I'm not even going to try. This is a gut job right now. And, it works.
I know a guy who back in the 80s, early 80s, he had written this book that was brilliant. It was absurdist and had to do with postmen that, since they delivered your mail anyway, they would also perform executions. People. Anyway, it was just brilliant, but he never he showed it to me, but he never did anything with it, and it just sat there. And now it's been like 30 years, and it was insane. It had this cult having taken over Disneyland, and there was a postman was the hero, and this science man was the villain, and he had these dog men soldiers. It was bizarre, but it was really good.
Yeah.
And no one ever was there to pat him on the back and go, you should pursue this.
Do it. Go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that first one, the first one's the hardest. It's like anything. It's like murder. It's you know what I mean? Like letting that first one go. No Flesh Shall We Spare took me 5-6 years to do, just because it started out as a 2,000-word short story. And then every time I go through it, no, it needs this. And that prompted revamping and whatever.
Yeah.
And then when I got to 160,000 words, I was like, I should probably bring this baby in.
Yes, let's reel it in here and cut a couple things out, maybe
and then
this up a little bit. And
and now with the Tales from the Lazaretto, I'm back up to about 110.
Nice. Hey, that's my first one was 90,000.
There you go.
And we after doing the edits, I cut it down to 80,000. So that's
nice.
Some serious cutting. I have a little novella that's a partner with the first one. It's a what do you call it? Prequel. Mm-hmm. And that's a 31,000. My second book of the series, the actual main story, that one's, I'm sitting at a hot 140 right now. And nice. I got 9 or 10 chapters left to write. And I'm like, oh my God.
That's good.
Huge.
I was just talking to a guy in the writing group about it. Like, he's very good at moving things, A to B to C to D.
Yeah.
But I notice a lot of people they get excited about that scene down the road. Yeah. And so they kind of buzz through this. It's like, no, I'm always saying to people, like, give it its moment. It may be nothing. Like, I'm working on a piece now about a dog, that man and the dog fall in a hole, and the dog, stop feeding a dog, and pretty soon it starts looking at you funny.
You look like steak.
Add to that a compound fracture and a little rabies, and we've got a fun time. So, that was a lot of making that work, taking the time to go, no, I've got to lay this groundwork. In the first zombie novel, I had to lay the groundwork early that the female lead had to tell, like, she would do something and always turn her back to her opponent. And it's like, no.
Yeah, you got.
And so I had to figure that out for myself. Like, I have to put that way in the front so that when it happens at the end, it makes some sense.
Yeah. I'm having that problem right now with my series. I have a 5-book series planned. I've already done that, and I've got huge backstories and huge things. And I'm like, I had to stop what I was doing, literally stop my progress, went to the part where the one of the villains is basically exposed, and I had to write the entire backstory, and the backstory is extensive. I had to stop what I was doing, and I'm loving that I did. I'm so glad I did, because I found, like you said, those little tiny moments you mirror in the beginning of the story. And so I had to go back and do that now, because the second book's where the evolution of this person really comes alive.
Right.
See those little bits.
The one of the guys in the writing group is having that where it's a very New York centric. And so it's like, look, I have to keep telling people, like, listen, the subway system, I don't. And if you're going to walk down a street, that's such a great opportunity for flavor, right? Like, what are you smelling? What are you hearing? In horror book, there's a story called Sovereignty, where it's just that. It's someone walking down the street, and you're having to set it all up. It has to do with someone shooting someone, but spoiler.
I forget things easily. It's okay.
but to take that time to, mention, it's those moments. I remember early on, I did a thing where a lady falls, and as she's falling, she notices a spider web up on the eaves of the house. And that's one of those things, like, I don't know about you, if you've ever been in any accidents or been hurt or whatever, but you always remember the weirdest stuff. Like, I remember I smelled bacon. It's like, what? And that's the stuff that makes it real. That's the stuff that
people can connect with a little more.
Because they want to connect.
Yes.
It's up to the writer to mess that up.
Right. Yeah. That's an absolute fact.
I mean, they're there. They want it to be good. I always talk about sticking the landing. Like, how many times have you been reading something and you just think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then you get to that last act, and it's like, ooh,
I fumbled a bit, or I twitched a bit.
You blinked, and you weren't sure. That's why the importance. I'll just say thank you now to all the people that beta read for me. Because I got people that are brutal.
Yeah.
Like my wife, she'll hand things back and I thought we're finished. And she's like, yeah, you're not feeling this.
Oh, no.
Start over. Oh.
Okay. Well, we'll tweak it.
But I had this great girl, Heather Sturbiak, who is great. She's awesome. She's supportive, but she's also really good to
criticism.
Yeah.
Good. So I'm going to do one last question before we wrap up here. This has been a fantastic conversation, by the way.
Oh, no problem.
I've had a blast doing all this. It's good. It's just good hearing more information, more fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, I don't have accolades, but I have longevity.
Yeah. I'm trying to develop both. So the last question I have is any advice you would give for someone who is a budding either writer, horror writer? What would you say is the one thing that they need to attack, dive on, look at to become successful, or at least just to start in the horror writing?
I'll echo Stephen King and say that if you write, you have to read. That's really important. Do it. It's nothing's going to happen it's my experience anyway. Nothing happens in a big dump, right? The chimes, I think I sat down and wrote When I Fall in Love, It Will Be Forever in one sitting. But mostly it's, read up on other writers and what their schedule is. You find that they only write like 2 or 3 hours a day. Because after that, you start to notice things like, man, I'm using and so a lot. You know what I mean? Or you fall in love with a certain thing, and if you're working on something and it's not happening, then put it away. Just set it aside, do something else. It doesn't necessarily have to be writing, but go do something. I'm a big advocate of research. Research it to the point where, like, you could kind of BS your way through an interview about it.
Almost be a teacher about it. Almost teach.
Or find someone that can do that. And write every day. I try to write every day, even if and that's a liberal use of that term. Like I say, I'm a big fan of staring out the window. Make a book. Bradbury talks a lot about, if you think of a great line or a great premise, write it down someplace that you can go back to. I suffered writer's block. That's what Moonlight Serenades is. It's like I had writer's block for a long time after the first zombie book. And Moonlight is basically me writing my way through that. And that's why there's things like there's a story Amplexus in there that it's kind of a night gallery thing, but it's really kind of distasteful. But that was a matter of me just trying to work it out, trying to,
break back into it.
Yeah. And be open to inspiration. In String of Pearls, there's a story called Life, Death, and the Girl in the Cloth-Covered Box. That came about from me hearing a song, Sun Kill Moon's Carissa. I just heard it and it just struck me so hard that, little funny little ideas that will strike you. I'm trying to think of a good idea that I'm thinking about. I had an idea once I was watching something on metalworking, and I started to think about, what if someone were to use the nails that they crucified Jesus with and melt them down and make a dagger? What kind of power would that dagger have? And that became a story called The Dagger of Golgotha. It's a Father Thorpe. I have a character, Father Thorpe, who was initially conceived as Jean-Claude Van Damme, exorcist. There's a story in String of Pearls called The Sword of St. Michael that introduces him. And it's sort of, what if John Wick were a priest? That kind of a thing. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a line where he says, the church is all about turning the other cheek, but Father Thorpe was for when, those times when you run out of cheeks. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. Well, thank you for the advice. Hopefully anyone listening is a budding writer or horror writer. Take it with some stride and learn and just do. The big thing is just do. You can't learn by sitting and just reading. Reading helps, but learn by doing, and writing is absolutely the number one thing you got to do. So for everyone listening, where Thom, where is the best place for people to read your stories, buy your books, listen to radio, all that kind of stuff? Where's a good place?
The Amazon, of course. The books are available at Crossroad Press, David Wilson's label out there, which is great. They're very, very good people. Again, my website at Thom Carnell, Thom with an H. There's hundreds of hours of stuff there. There's old podcasts, there's interviews, there's stories, there's some audio portrayals of a couple of my stuff. And the radio show, I post about it on Facebook. I don't do a lot of social media because Twitter is a nightmare and Instagram isn't much better. And Facebook is just sort of where I default to. And I post a lot of that. Mostly it's what I'm watching, what I'm reading, news stuff that I've heard about. Anything, someone called it a stream of consciousness.
No. So I will also, if you could send me some links and everything, I will put that in the comments or in the description, so people can find you, find your stuff, find your work, and then hopefully just get to enjoy some good old-fashioned horror.
Awesome. Very good. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm here to help. And spread the word of some good stories.
Right on. Well, good, Ryan. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, Thom, I love that we got to have this conversation. It was a lot of fun, very insightful.
Hopefully we'll see you at a con or something around.
That'd be cool. I have not gone to anything crazy since the whole pandemic flew off the handle. So now that it's calming down, hopefully I can make my way out and check out some writing conventions, horror conventions, Comic Cons. I mean, anything that has stories there, I want to be a part of it. All right, everybody, it has been a blast. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Mighty Books Podcast. You guys have a great day. Are you an author? Do you know someone who is? If so, then message me, Ryan Oliver, at ryanmoliver.com to set up a free appointment to discuss being showcased on the Mighty Books Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the Mighty Books YouTube channel and share the link to this and more episodes with your friends and family. Thanks for listening. So long for now. Stay mighty and keep reading.